The Pokemon market can be very volatile, and that can provide opportunities but also present some challenges because volatility is a two-way street. When you're building your business or your collection, it can create value very quickly, but it can also wipe away value just as fast. So whether you're building a business or a collection, the question that you should really be asking yourself is not, is this going to go up or down, or even how risky is this? The actual question is, what kind of risk is this, and am I equipped to handle it? So I'm Drew from Quillybear Cards, and today we're going to be talking about risk, which is a topic that I think has some common misconceptions that can have some important repercussions for either your business or the collection that you're working on. And that's sort of independent of whether or not you're just starting out or if you've been here for a while and are looking to continue growing. So I'm going to try to illustrate these concepts using this card. This is the Korean Metamong Ditto promo, which was released last year, and it ended up being my best play of 2025. I bought around 50 copies of this card throughout the year, graded more of them than probably any other individual card, definitely more than any other individual card, and had a really good outcome in terms of margin on all of them. And in terms of monetary value, this was by far my biggest play in Pokemon to date. And so I want to walk through my decision making around this card as sort of a roadmap for our discussions about risk. So the first common misconception about risk is that it is a synonym for uncertainty. But while these two things are definitely related, they are not the same. And uncertainty, in short, is a probability. It's a probability you make up in your own head regarding possible outcomes of some particular action you're going to take. In this case, my actions of buying these Korean Ditto promos. And when you're considering buying cards, this is sort of your market research and knowledge about the supply, the likely demand, the probable grading outcomes if you're going to be grading things, the margins that you'll have if you're flipping them raw, and overall the likelihood of success of your investment. So these calculations, whether or not you've explicitly written them down or you're just kind of roughly sketching them out in your brain, are constantly happening in Pokemon, whether you're running a business or building a collection. And learning how to more accurately anticipate possible outcomes is something that comes with experience. So you definitely do have to get out there and take some chances, even if you know that they're not going to be 100%. Because remember, certainty is almost always a probability. There's a great quote by Mark Twain that says, "It ain't what you don't know that gets you in trouble, it's what you know for sure that just ain't so." And so it's always important to remember that certainty and your level of uncertainty are always probabilistic, and you're gonna win some and lose some no matter how well you do your research, because again, the market is quite volatile and you never know how things are going to work out. So let's go back to the Ditto. When I was considering buying copies of this card, I was certainly running these sorts of calculations about my probability of success. And I was seeing that there was some current supply on the market, but they seemed to be disappearing off of eBay faster than they were being replenished. I did some research on the card itself and realized that it was released in this relatively small limited print window. We were currently going through some international shipping issues with tariffs and such, so the difficulty of obtaining them had kind of just gone up relative to other international releases in the past. And of course it has cute art. It is these derpy Dittos with a Pikachu, and Pikachu's almost always a winner. So I decided to buy a couple of copies initially to sort of test it out and check out how they look. And a few of them came in and they seem to have excellent print quality, so I decided I wanted to make a bigger grading play. But even though I had made that decision, there were still a lot of variables left to answer. For example, how many should I buy? What price am I willing to pay for them? What percentage of my operating capital do I want to dedicate to this play? And that's where risk comes in. Uncertainty is a probability that you can estimate. Risk is not. There's a quote by a really great financial planner, Carl Richards, who now is an author, that explains risk in the following way. He says, risk is what's left over once you've thought of everything. It's what you didn't anticipate. As he said, in other words, you don't get killed by the car you see coming, you get killed by the one you don't. So let's get into risk a little bit. And risk is usually thought of just as one thing, but it actually has two components that are both important to consider. The first is risk capacity, and the second is risk tolerance. Risk capacity, to start with, is somewhat objective. It's your life circumstances. It's your emergency fund. It's your cash flow for your business. It is your job situation. It is your responsibilities. It's how much pain you can absorb without having to make difficult decisions. It comes down to the real world constraints around you. So in Pokemon, the real question that you should be asking yourself about your risk capacity in regards to a particular play is, if this were to go against me, if worst case scenarios were to play out, would I be forced to make decisions I wouldn't otherwise want to make or that I would regret later? For example, being forced to sell at a bottom because you're in a pinch. And if that's the case, then your risk capacity may be a little bit lower than this play allows, or you need to dial it back or something. And this is all independent of how confident you feel in the play itself, because as we said, there's always uncertainty, it's always a probability, and there's always the car that you don't see coming that could show up anyway. So on the other side, risk tolerance is psychological. It is how much pain you can sit through without abandoning your plan or doing something crazy at the worst possible time after something goes bad. It is your behavior under pressure, or your ability to respond to bad scenarios in reasonable ways. So you may want to ask yourself, like, even if you have the money to take a hit, can you emotionally handle it? And if things go bad, do you tend to revenge buy or panic sell, or do you freeze and stop making rational decisions? Or above all, worse, do you just panic, abandon your plan altogether, and leave the hobby? So while there's certainly a lot of volatility in the Pokemon market, a lot of the damage that people end up doing to themselves doesn't have anything to do with the market at all. It's people that end up blowing up their plans because they overestimated their ability to tolerate downside risk, and end up making a mistake that they either can't recover from financially or psychologically, and end up leaving. Of course, it is important to sort of explore your own tolerance for risk, and sometimes your own understanding of your tolerance for risk is a learned experience. But I would just encourage people, especially those that are new, to be extra thoughtful at first and learn through sort of measured, calculated decisions how you actually respond to unpleasant situations before you take massive swings that you're not really sure how you might respond to, and could end up taking you out of the hobby for a long time. So just to sum up this section, capacity is what you can afford, but tolerance is what you can stomach. And the market isn't always the thing that blows people up, but forced decisions and making irrational choices in a pinch often does. And you really need to consider both sides of risk, because even if you're right a lot of the time and you're profitable, you need to be able to survive the path, both from a financial lens and from a psychological lens. Because longevity in the hobby, like in traditional investing, now for 20 years has been shown to be the greatest compounder of all. So this is how I think about risk tolerance and capacity, and to illustrate a few different personas within this space, I've come up with a simple grid, and I'm gonna move to the side so that I think I can edit it in over here. And let's sort of start in the bottom left quadrant. These are the people that have low risk tolerance and low capacity for risk. I call these people the stable starters. Maybe you just started out in the hobby, you don't have a lot of buffer, you don't have a lot of cash to work with, so you're gonna focus on sort of the maybe lower margin but lower volatility plays to build that buffer and that capacity up. Then you might move up. You might build your capacity, and maybe you're still new and you still have a lower risk tolerance. So these are the people that I call cautious builders, where they have more capacity and a lower tolerance. They may be underutilizing some of their resources, but that might actually be more beneficial to them in the long run, as long as their actions are sort of matched up with their psychology as well. And then of course, as people build tolerance for risk and get more experience, maybe they move over into the capitalized operator. And these are the big dogs. These are the well-capitalized businesses that have a lot of experience. They can take big swings, they can handle downturns, and they're very resilient to potential failures that are able to come up. So these are sort of the, again, well-capitalized operators. And then lastly is this quadrant that I've called the danger zone. And these people have high risk tolerance and low capacity. And the reason I call this the danger zone is that over time, these sorts of people are more inclined to take outside risks and take risks on that are not necessarily commensurate with their financial backing or safety net to back it up, which is why I call this the danger zone, because over time, just statistically, they're the most likely to sort of blow themselves up and have potentially seriously negative outcomes from this. Well, I'm sure we would all love to be somewhere in the capitalized operator quadrant. That doesn't necessarily mean that you can't be successful elsewhere in this grid, except for maybe the danger zone, where these are people that are more likely to take risks that they can't survive or that will severely impact their businesses or personal lives, which is also known as wipeout risk. But the real trick is to be able to know accurately where you lie on this grid or in this continuum at any given moment, because your position will change over time, both due to personal circumstances, cash flow, your business considerations. Maybe you just had a new kid, you have different life responsibilities, job changes if you're not doing this as a full-timer. All of these things impact where you lie on this grid. And the main thing is that if you're able to be honest with yourself and accurately place yourself and align your decisions to where you actually exist on this grid, you're going to end up building a business more sustainably or building a collection more sustainably, with a higher likelihood of being able to fully survive the journey. So if your decisions are chronically misaligned with where you lie on this grid, what your capacity and tolerance for risk is, eventually your system is going to break, either financially or psychologically. And just to note, I'm in no way advocating for analysis paralysis or excessive risk avoidance, because as you probably can tell, having less tolerance for risk than your capacity allows may mean you're underutilizing your resources. And having higher risk tolerance and making bigger swings, as long as you can survive them, sometimes leads to some outsized gains. But you have to learn through experience in this hobby, both in your success and failures. And I encourage people to get out there, take some chances, learn through experience, and grow your tolerance for risk as long as you have the capacity to back it up. So make some thoughtful choices, explore, but just ensure that you're not trying so hard to overperform in every individual battle that you end up losing the larger war. So now, let's go back to the Ditto. I bought a lot of these in the moment because I had a pretty high level of certainty that it was going to work out, but I also aligned the amount of them that I bought with my capacity and tolerance for risk. Maybe if I had more capacity due to my level of certainty, I would have bought more, but it's also possible I would have looked at the market and diversified my inventory into other different things. But I made the decision that I did, and fortunately, it worked out. And I'll say that again. Fortunately, it worked out. I think it was a good play at the time, and I can give myself some credit for analyzing that, but I certainly know there was some probability that it could have gone otherwise. I could have gotten hit by a car I didn't see coming. There could have been hundreds of thousands of copies of these just waiting to come out that were locked up somewhere in Korea and totally blown up my play before my grades hit the market. But fortunately that didn't happen, and it worked out. But I think I would have lived to tell the tale and would have been able to handle both financially and psychologically if it went poorly. So just finally, remember that in Pokemon, volatility is the price of admission. The real question is whether or not you're built for the ride. And with that, thanks so much for listening. If you like these sorts of videos on the intersection of collecting, running a business, and the psychology that ties all of these things together, please throw me a like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel, and I will see you guys all on the next one. Thanks.